Welcome, everybody. My name is Lori Prue, and I'll be the moderator of today's Cafe Scientifique about parenting and arthritis. I am a managing director part-time with the Canadian Arthritis Patient Alliance, and I also live with juvenile rheumatoid arthritis, and I actually have firsthand experiences navigating the challenges of life with arthritis, particularly around pregnancy and parenting, which are the topics of the two Cafe Scientifique webinars that we're holding. I have two children myself, so I know about many of these challenges and managing some of the symptoms and the tasks of parenting while living with a chronic illness like rheumatoid arthritis. So the purpose today is really to bring together experts to help answer some of the questions that you may have and to learn about planning for and being a parent while living with arthritis. We have a really stellar lineup of speakers who will speak to various aspects and some of the supports that might be available to help you through some of these challenges. So we'll be talking about drawing from community supports and learning from Indigenous communities, for example, what some of the research is telling us about the experience of living with arthritis and parenting. And we were going to have Mariah Leach here today, but unfortunately she won't be able to join us, but she would be speaking to navigating the different stages of parenting. But nonetheless, we will plan on doing something at a time that is amenable to her. And so, stay tuned for more on that front. So as a result, I mean, today's webinar might be, or it should probably be about an hour instead of the planned hour and a half. So I'll still introduce Mariah though, because she's, such an expert on the topic. And I think some of her resources can still be helpful to many of you. So I'd like to, before we get too much into things, make a land acknowledgement. And in particular, where I'm located and the place known as Ottawa, colonially as Ottawa, I just wanted to acknowledge that I'm meeting, living, working, and playing on the territories of the Anishinaabe Nation or the Algonquin peoples. And I'd like to pay my respects to elders, both past and present. And I know we might be coming from all different parts of Canada. That's my own personal land acknowledgement. But you can maybe take, a moment to think about and reflect on the land that you live, work, and play on out of respect to and in recognition of the Indigenous peoples where you are located. And I do think it's particularly helpful, or important. I mean, this month being National Indigenous History Month. So I think it's really a time to reflect about the unique cultures, traditions, and experiences of First Nations, Inuit, and Métis peoples in Canada. One of our team members, actually, and she wasn't able to make it today, Louise Crane, has shared that it was really important to hold this webinar this month, actually, in recognition that parenting in the family, that there's a particular emphasis on it this particular month. So anyways, that being said, let's just take, a few moments to reflect on that and where you're all coming from. So a few housekeeping items to kind of get things started. We will be recording this webinar and uploading it to our YouTube channel. So if you perhaps can't stay for the whole time, you'll still be able to access the presentation. As noted on the CAPA website, this webinar is intended for education, information, and communication and doesn't constitute medical advice. You should always seek the advice of a physician or other healthcare professionals to get any specific advice about your case. We'll be asking our panelists questions like after their presentation, but also at the end. We'll just kind of open it up and open the floor up. So you're encouraged to add your questions into the chat box, or if you want to message them directly to me privately, in case you don't want to sort of share them publicly, you're more than welcome to do that. I will not mention who they're coming from. So just wanted to make an active offer of that. So we'll be having a 15-minute presentation by each panelist. Like I said, the brief question and answer period after each, as well as a general question and answer. And we're also very happy to have received funding from the Canadian Institutes of Health Research to allow for these Cafe Scientifique webinars to happen. And so with that, I think I will pass it over to Preet, who will do a shared breath.
Hi everyone. I'll invite you all to close your eyes or not, whatever you prefer, or even turn off your cameras if that makes it easier for you. I will turn mine off. Now as you close your eyes or not, feel your feet on the floor or the surface or your body on the surface you're sitting on. And take a deep breath in through your nose. 3, 2, 1. Hold it in your stomach or your chest. And then let go of it through your mouth. Take another deep breath in on the count of 3, 2, 1. Hold it in your stomach again or your chest. And let go of it through your mouth. Take one final deep breath in through your nose. 3, 2, 1. Hold it again. And let go of it through your mouth. Feel your feet on the surface again or your body on the surface. Check in with your body how you're doing. And gradually open your eyes. That's basically it.
All right. Thank you so much, Preet. So with that, we're hopefully situating ourselves into the space to talk about parenting with arthritis. We just thought we'd do a few polls. So I might ask Anna to maybe launch the first one that tells us a little bit about yourself. Do you live with arthritis or have a family member that lives with arthritis? So you're a healthcare provider, I'm a researcher, or you're a buffet and a little bit of everything. We bring multiple perspectives to this webinar. So I could see that there's some that are researchers, many that also, live with arthritis or have someone that's affected by the condition. Great. All right, so I think mostly everyone has taken it, yeah. Well, maybe move on to the next one. Where are you joining from? So I kind of grouped things a little bit. Western Canada, Ontario, Quebec, Atlantic Canada, the territories you've gone global. All right, I think we've got everyone. We have many from Western Canada, as well as some from Atlantic Canada. That's great. That's great. And then next poll is really just to figure out, how would you sort of self-assess your own level of knowledge of parenting strategies or support for people living with arthritis. So there's no right or wrong answer, for any of these things. It's just whatever you think. And then we're gonna do this poll again at the end, just to see if we've helped move that a little bit further along. So hopefully we've provided some additional support around that. All right. Thank you so much, Anna, with the polling. And hopefully everybody can see those results. So yeah, then really next up is to sort of briefly speak to our speakers or our panelists here today. So Mariah, like I said, is unable to make it today, but she has done, I actually met her a number of years ago as another mom that lives with rheumatoid arthritis. And so she has been living with the condition since she was 25. And after learning firsthand about, similar to me with her experiences of pregnancy and parenthood with chronic illness, she founded Mamas Facing Forward, which is an informational website and support group for people with chronic illness who want to become parents. So I'm also a member of that group. It's on Facebook, and I can give the links to that afterwards. But it's been an invaluable resource for me because there are a lot of ups and downs as being a parent with this sort of illness, and it's a great and positive space to kind of get support. So I just like to do a plug for that, and I'll put that in the chat afterwards as well. But our first speaker here today will be Ashley Hayward, who is a PhD candidate in Peace and Conflict Studies at the University of Manitoba, and also a Vanier Canada graduate scholar. And she has a broad interest in Indigenous health, the social determinants of health, culture as a health intervention, and human rights. She's also a wife and mother to 2 daughters, as well as a community engaged researcher working in partnership with a range of Indigenous organizations. And then our next speaker, and I won't do like as detailed of an intro, in between the presentations, but Catherine Backman is a professor emerita of occupational science and occupational therapy at the University of British Columbia and a senior scientist at Arthritis Research Canada. As an occupational therapist herself, her research primarily investigates the impact of arthritis on people's participation in paid and unpaid work, including parenting, household work, employment, and social roles. And she's also looked at different, ways or interventions or treatments to help people, participate more in those roles. So with that being said, I am going to stop sharing my screen and then pass it over to Ashley to start the presentation. I'm really looking forward to this.
Amazing. Thank you, Lori, for that introduction, and thank you, Preet, for the breathing exercises. I appreciate that very much. So good afternoon, everyone. It's afternoon where I am. My name is Ashley Hayward, and I am a proud citizen of the Manitoba Métis Federation. And as Lori mentioned, a PhD candidate in Peace and Conflict Studies at the University of Manitoba. Really, my research focuses on addressing health inequities through kind of a multidisciplinary lens. And I'm here to talk to you today about the She Walks With Me project, the Urban Indigenous Doula Project. This initiative really combines Indigenous knowledge with health and social service care to improve support for urban Indigenous birthing people in Winnipeg, and we'll explore how we can foster culturally based care through an urban Indigenous doula training program. Before I start too much, let's just make sure I can control this. There we go. I wanted to give you a little introduction about me, which is pretty common in Indigenous ways of being and doing. So you know the lens that I bring to my work. I live in a community called Giroux, Manitoba, with my family on a 3-acre property where we really enjoy a close connection to nature. We raise chickens, and we care for 2 large dogs. This is Treaty 1 territory. I've been married to my husband, Joel, for 15 years, and our life is filled with a lot of outdoor adventures like hunting and quadding and camping. I'm also the proud mother of 2 young women who you'll see here. Mika's a passionate U16 AA ringette goalie who excels in all sports, and she really inspires me every day. She enjoys all sorts of games and will play anything that you're up for. Maddie, on the other hand, combines her feminine side with her love for the outdoors. She enjoys spending time with her friends, archery, and also spending time alone. Their strength and individuality is really key motivators for me as I returned to university 10 years after graduating high school to pursue further education. Throughout my journey, that's both personal and academic, I've come to value the importance of choice in birthing. My hope for my daughters, if they choose to birth one day, is that they have the freedom to shape their birthing experiences in ways that are meaningful and empowering to them, ensuring that the journey is safe, supported, and well aligned with their own values. So now about the presentation. If anybody read the blog, you'll know, but doulas are support folks who provide continuous physical, emotional, and informational support to a birthing person before, during, and shortly after childbirth to help them achieve the best birthing experience possible. While doulas aren't a regulated profession, and therefore they don't offer a standardized model of care, they can really play an important role for families. So traditionally, we had these roles in Indigenous families. So sometimes they were called birth helpers. We use the term Indigenous doula just to provide some familiarity with it. And they provide prenatal, birth, and postpartum care. And in some cases, they also played an important role during other reproductive life events, such as a first period or menopause. Indigenous birth workers tended not only to the physical aspects of healthcare, but also the spiritual aspects as well. In some cases, birth workers conducted ceremonies to honor the new infant and mother, and then were honored with ceremonial kinship responsibilities, such as the child's naming. Birth workers were therefore an important part of kinship structures, community life, sociocultural systems, and reproductive health and wellness. But to provide a general overview and explain how this project came to be, we need to place the project into the current context. So while Canada prides itself on being a multicultural nation, it still grapples with deep-seated racism within institutions affecting education, healthcare, social services, and beyond. This contradiction is starkly evident in the treatment of Indigenous people within systems, and we can see many examples of this within our own province of Manitoba, where I am. For example, in August 2014, there was a death of a young woman named Tina Fontaine in Winnipeg, which highlighted really the dangers that Indigenous youth face, a story that was echoed that same year with Renelle Harper's survival after a brutal attack just a few months later in November that same year. These incidences can spotlight the systemic neglect and underprotection that Indigenous youth face. So in 2016, the National Inquiry into Murdered and Missing Indigenous Women and Girls revealed the extent of systemic racism, accumulating in a 2019 report with 231 calls for justice. Racism isn't just limited to acts of direct violence. It really pervades the healthcare system, and we've seen that in our province with the case of the 2008 case of Brian Sinclair, a double amputee who was confined to a wheelchair who died from a treatable infection after being presumed to be homeless, using substances, and avoiding the cold weather in an emergency room. As a country, we also witnessed the 2020 case of Joyce Echequan, an Indigenous woman subjected to racist abuse by healthcare staff in her final moments of life. So these aren't isolated incidents, but examples of really a systemic problem that extends beyond the very fabric of Canadian society, including critical events like pregnancy and childbirth. We have informal practices such as the birth evacuation policy that force Indigenous birthing individuals to give birth far from home, away from their cultural practices and territory, and away from local support systems that they might have. In Manitoba, the child welfare system's failure are epitomized by the story of Phoenix Sinclair, which revealed a system where Indigenous children were disproportionately placed in the care of child and family services, being separated from their biological and kinship families. The practice of birth alerts, which ended in 2020, really marked a step towards addressing these systemic biases, but the journey was far from over when we witnessed this new mandatory social work consult checklist. Just before I continue, I wanted to know if you know what is the percentage of Indigenous children in foster care in Canada, and maybe you can just share that in the chat. So 28.6%, 43.7%, or 53.8%. Yeah. So according to the census in 2021, 53.8% of children in foster care are Indigenous, but account for only 7.7% of the child population. In Manitoba, those stats are drastically increased, and you may have heard that 90% of children in foster care in our own province are Indigenous. And we'll talk more about that in a moment. Yep. So efforts really to empower Indigenous communities through the training of Indigenous midwives and doulas represent kind of this beacon of hope, aiming to provide culturally appropriate care. Yet it's a path filled with challenges, including the limited nature of midwifery programs and the competitive nature of those fields. The goal of our project, as well as that of other community groups who offer Indigenous doula training, is to ensure that Indigenous people in Canada receive care that's not only respectful, but also culturally appropriate, marking the beginning of much needed transformation in Canada's approach to healthcare and social services within Indigenous communities and for Indigenous folks. We've been in the process of developing an urban Indigenous doula curriculum that's designed not only to meet the unique needs of the urban Indigenous families in Winnipeg. This curriculum draws from experts that provide support to Indigenous folks and doula research that we've conducted, and it also integrates cultural spiritual support. Our goal is to create a holistic, culturally based learning experiences that doulas will in turn provide to Indigenous families that are empowering, respectful, and culturally appropriate so that it's really the care that they deserve within their perinatal journey. Ultimately, we know that the community can guide what they know is going to work, and that it's important that we listen to that. The training curriculum aims to deepen Indigenous doulas' knowledge and understanding of different types of support while extending their scope of care. The curriculum equips these trainees with essential certifications and up-to-date training in areas that are critical for supporting birthing individuals. So that includes motivational interviewing, perinatal mental health certificates, infant CPR, first aid, and naloxone administration. While there may not currently be Indigenous doulas specifically that specialize in arthritis at this time, their wide scope of care and training and cultural knowledge really places them in an ideal position to care for a wide range of conditions that disproportionately affect Indigenous folks. In collaboration with our community partners, we identified a wide range of topics that are pivotal to the curriculum, which you can see on the slide. And so some of those are understanding sexual and gender diversity, promoting cultural safety and anti-racism, understanding substance use and harm reduction strategies, navigating that CFS involvement and community resources, advocating on behalf of the clients within the healthcare system, supporting individuals with different abilities and reducing barriers to care. So a unique aspect of kind of this training and this program is the integration of self-care and self-reflection practices to ensure that the support workers maintain their well-being while they're also delivering care. This curriculum is not really just an educational journey, but it's a commitment to fostering a supportive and knowledgeable and compassionate community of care providers who are well prepared to meet the diverse needs of Indigenous families within Winnipeg. By focusing on these comprehensive topics, we aim to create a holistic support of like a system that respects the cultural practices, addresses systemic challenges, and promotes the health and well-being of both the birthing individual, their newborns, and their families, as well as the person providing support. So once the content is completely developed, which will be this month, it will be reviewed by an Indigenous panel comprising of 4 experts, including a social worker, a Two-Spirit knowledge keeper, a midwife, and a nurse. This diverse group will use their expertise to ensure the curriculum is appropriate and aligns with the goals and values of the project. After the review, we plan to integrate their recommendations and suggestions into the curriculum. And this process is really about guaranteeing the curriculum not only meets, but actually exceeds the needs of the communities and their expectations. The next step involves presenting the curriculum after we incorporate any feedback to individuals with lived experience. So by hearing from those who have firsthand experience with our community partner organizations, we'll ensure that the content is relevant and useful for them. At this phase, we'll gather the feedback and make necessary updates to the curriculum to make sure their voices are also heard and involved. The pilot phase will allow us to test the training program in a real world setting and get feedback from both facilitators or trainers, as well as the participants. And that feedback, again, will make any necessary adjustments before a full scale launch that could be adapted to other local partner organizations and even potentially nationally. So we believe that this comprehensive approach to creating, thank you. Comprehensive approach to creating an urban Indigenous training program in Winnipeg is not just about developing courses, but really a journey to empowerment, to education, and to excellence in supporting Indigenous birthing people. The challenges we see in Manitoba mirror a broad national issue of systemic racism, cultural insensitivity, and negligence within the health and social services. This has spurred a reevaluation of support for Indigenous people, notably through the resurgence of Indigenous doulas. This approach blends traditional birthing support with advocacy for body sovereignty, acknowledging the significant cultural and health impacts that are lost within our traditions. Our journey, shared with Indigenous health and social service agencies, reveals a complex landscape with more questions than answers often. It's evident that the healthcare and social service system often fail to provide equitable and safe care for Indigenous people. So the role of Indigenous doulas in this context is promising, but it's still uncertain. The integration of traditional birth workers into the mainstream health system faces significant barriers, including a system that's slow to change with health human resources and little incentive for mainstream certification. Despite these challenges, doulas are really crucial in advocating for Indigenous rights within these systems, offering hope for transformation, though this will never be a cure-all system. So for me, as I draw this presentation to a close, I'd like to leave you with a question to think about, and try and flip the slide again. Thank you. And invite you to share within the chat your thoughts on it. But based on the insights and stories that are shared in today's presentation and your own lived experience, what's one area that you believe needs to be included within the urban Indigenous doula training curriculum? Thank you so much for joining me today. I'm really happy to answer any questions that you might have.
Oh, thank you so much, Ashley. I mean, I think there's a lot to learn, and it seems like an amazing support. I know I had considered, hiring the services, because I mean, they're not generally covered, by the healthcare system. So just curious, like, for Indigenous people having a child now, like, how would they go about, or could they access a doula? Or just to kind of, I know your project is sort of moving forward and likely will provide broader access. So I just want to see, like, now versus what might be,
Yeah, so there is for hire Indigenous doulas that exist throughout the country. A lot of them have been trained by Zagedowin, which is a grassroots organization located right here in Winnipeg.
Yeah.
There is a group out in BC who's doing a lot of training, and they have a grant program. So it's a little bit convoluted, but their grant program, you have to be trained by DONA, which is Doulas of North America. And so lots of Indigenous folks don't want to be trained by that because there's lots of like mainstream content, but not a lot of cultural content. They don't find it very relevant. But Indigenous families can apply to get a doula through that program. And then they're kind of matched up and they can figure out a way to pay for it that way. So they're still for hire doulas, but they're grant funded. Our project, we pay the doulas a salary, so a living wage, so that they will have security within their own job and make sure that that balance of like taking care of yourself is based on not having to fight for more and more people to support to be able to fund your living wage. But what does that look like going forward once the research isn't here is one of the questions that we're working with our community partners on to make sure we're collecting the right evaluation evidence, the right data that they can then make a case for their funders to say, this really needs to be built into our budget. And this is how we showed that it worked, how it like improved health outcomes. One of the challenges with that is that you can collect data on everything, right? And so like, how do you find what is really going to make the difference so that it helps the government see the value in this type of support?
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, like I cross my fingers. I know that, as you mentioned, it's, there can often be more questions than answers given the complexity of things, but just curious because I know, broadly speaking, for non-Indigenous people, right, it is sort of like you need to pay for it out of your own pocket. And like so many allied healthcare professionals, right? It's just unfortunately not something covered under our, our public healthcare system. So that is too bad, but I'm glad you're thinking of it, that's for sure. And so there are some ways.
Yeah. And we do
I,
see, I should say, we do see in the States what they're advocating for now is coverage through like a Blue Cross, like a type of insurance like
right.
that. It hasn't hit Canada yet, but I do envision it will, so that at least if you did have a health spending account or you did have allied health professional coverage within your benefits, that potentially you'd be able to get a doula. But because it's unregulated, one of the hard parts is anybody can say that they're a doula.
Right, right. Yeah. Yeah, I know. Hopefully we'll see the process evolve, because I often think back, even in my own personal circumstances, how helpful that might have been. And I'm curious here, just one final question and I'll move on to Catherine, but the newborn care, infant feeding, postpartum, because a lot of people that live with inflammatory arthritis, like we're often told that we can flare, our condition can actually worsen after birth. We're told that our medications, we may or may not be able to keep taking them because often we rely on many prescription medications. So I'm just curious what it looks like. I could see that really filling an important gap for, for many people, including Indigenous peoples, because also Indigenous peoples in Canada do have a higher, incidence of inflammatory arthritis. So I think this is particularly relevant for them, perhaps, in the afterbirth period. So.
Yeah, I think one of the things that the doulas, the curriculum right now is working on is really basing it from a harm reduction strategy. And so thinking about that in terms of you are going to take your medication and you can still potentially breastfeed. And so what are the ways in which does that work for you? How do we hold the baby? Like, what are those kinds of strategies? It's not always easy because just like you said at the beginning, like this doesn't constitute medical advice. The doulas, because they develop such a deep relationship with the birthing person, sometimes their opinion becomes like medical advice. And so we do have to walk kind of a fine line to make sure that folks aren't going against what their OBGYNs or midwives or like actual healthcare providers are saying. that has created some problems in the past, and we've seen it. And it's created a lot of tension between kind of healthcare providers and doulas, and not all healthcare providers are supportive of doulas. So, we're trying to balance like an approach of like ask questions, have, it empower people through advocacy, empower people through providing information and letting people be the experts in their own lives to make the best decisions for themselves. And if something is what they want, how do you support them to do that? And so if they are really adamant that they want to chest feed, how do you support them to do that in the best way possible? So it's not about providing the medical advice, it's just about, like, from a harm reduction approach, you're going to do it regardless. How do I make sure that we do it in the safest way possible?
Yeah, right. Yeah, I know. And I mean, just speaking from my own personal experience, it was often quite painful managing the sort of chest feeding, breastfeeding, and I could have really used some support, and I'm sure I'm not alone in that during that period of time to help minimize the pain. So with that, I think, thank you so much, Ashley, and we'll come back with all of our panelists at the end, but I would like to kind of invite Catherine Backman. I mean, I think Catherine will probably be talking to us a lot about how, occupational therapists, what her research has found in terms of supporting parents that live with arthritis. So with that, I will pass it over to you.
Great, thank you. Hey, well, for me, it's still morning, so good morning, everyone. I'm joining the call from East Vancouver. This is located on the ancestral, traditional, and unceded territories of the Coast Salish peoples, including the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh, who have been caretakers of this land for. And the area where my house is has been most commonly associated with the Tsleil-Waututh, or what used to be called the Burrard Band and People Waters here. As Lori introduced me, I'm Professor Emeritus, which just means I'm old. I retired recently from the University of British Columbia about this time last year. I've been at UBC as an educator and researcher for about 37 years. I've been an occupational therapist for 43 years. My research is largely related to the impact of chronic illness, and in particular, especially arthritis, on social roles, including participation in paid and unpaid work. And unpaid work being things like parenting, so the topic of today, household work and volunteering. And so I'm going to do a very informal presentation that draws on the collective group of research projects. So I'll share a few things that have been learned in research with parents who have inflammatory types of arthritis, like rheumatoid arthritis, ankylosing spondylitis, psoriatic arthritis, juvenile arthritis, and lupus being the most common participants.
So the biggest good news message out of this collection of research relates to the doing of parenting tasks and the being or identity as a parent. So overall, parents with arthritis report more difficulties with parenting tasks than parents without arthritis. And this is usually due to symptoms like pain and fatigue, decreased mobility, decreased mood. But parents with arthritis compared to those without arthritis report a similar sense of satisfaction or joy as parenting, as parents, a similar sense of competency and identity of being an involved, nurturing, competent, satisfied, joyful parent. And this seems to hold true for both mothers and fathers. So on to, the reason that this is important to understand is that many people with chronic autoimmune diseases like inflammatory types of arthritis have been advised not to become a parent. They've been, the decision about parenting is often questioned. And I think that people who are giving this kind of advice need to be fully aware of the parenting experiences of people with and without inflammatory types of arthritis or chronic diseases in order to give understand more appropriately what's involved in the decision making to become a parent. So on to the next slide then. So generally, inflammatory types of arthritis do create havoc in people's lives. They create uncertainty, or usually related to the unpredictable symptoms of arthritis, with disruptions in day-to-day activities like employment, parenting, and leisure activities. It takes some time to get symptoms under control, or takes a while to learn how to be flexible with the ups and downs of arthritis. And this has colloquially been described as having good days, bad days, and worse days. The uncertainty arises because it's not always possible to predict if a day or a week or a month is going to be good, bad, or worse. In one of our studies with mothers with inflammatory types of arthritis, this uncertainty was described as sometimes I can, sometimes I can't. They had ways of figuring things out. They developed new habits. They changed their mindset, always trying to achieve that, being able to be the parent, do the types of things they wanted to as parents, or be the parent that they envisioned themselves or wanted to be. But sometimes the arthritis got in the way of that and they couldn't do it. An example of figuring things out is a mom who, when she was expecting her baby, she had a friend who had twins and needed a little bit of help. And this was a really symbiotic relationship, because the mom with arthritis could go and help her friend with twins and start problem solving in advance. She figured out, for example, that she wanted sleepers with zippers, not snaps or some other fastening. And so she was able to develop in advance of the birth of her own baby some strategies and ideas. She knew what kinds of clothing she wanted for her infant, and she developed different bathing strategies so she could get the equipment and supplies that she needed in advance. So she was figuring things out and how she was going to accommodate some of the tasks of parenting, or what tasks might be delegated to other people, or how to ask for help. Another mother, after a little time grieving over the loss of different activities, such as skiing with her family, she changed her mindset about how she would engage in different family-oriented leisure activities, and she started coaching. And so she talked about this as being on the sidelines, which can kind of be a negative impact of arthritis, but sometimes being on the sidelines can be exactly what you want to do at that stage of your children's lives. For example, you want them to be more independent, so coaching or cheering from the sidelines is just a shift in mindset to supporting your children in their activities, or engaging in family activities a little bit differently than before. And a third example, on her worst days, where one mom knew she wasn't going to be able to accommodate physically a lot of the things that were part of her typical day, she used to spend part of her day gathering her children and storybooks onto a big blanket. And this just became a routine way of how they shared story time. And on the blanket, they would enjoy quiet play and nurturing and napping all together. So this whole process of uncertainties and activity disruption and doing things differently has been described as influencing people's self-perceptions, their identities, or changing views of self. And this process of changing views of self, which is very productive and really helps people adapt to their new identity and develop strategies or support their sense of self-worth in different occupational roles like parenting. But the process of getting there can be somewhat stressful. So the next slide. So this stress is natural, and it actually helps us grow and develop skills. Distress is distressful, and we don't really like it, and we'd like to avoid or minimize distress and learn how to manage stress or keep it at a reasonable level. So all these good days, bad days, and worse days can create strain on the body and taxes the immune system over time. So why is it important to be aware of this impact of arthritis? Well, arthritis is already an autoimmune disorder, and want to be aware of things that support a healthy immune system and minimize the impact on the immune system. Often when arthritis is not well controlled, or we're talking about bad and worse days, so there's a bit of a flare or something's happened to increase or exacerbate the different symptoms. Fatigue is one of the symptoms that is most apparent in people's experiences, and it can be overwhelming. People cannot always implement the strategies and tips that work on their good days. They don't have the same impact on a bad day or a worse day when different symptoms are out of control. And fatigue is real, and it's not being tired. Being tired has a cure. You can take a nap, you can have a spa day, there's rejuvenating activities that a day or two later, the fatigue, that tiredness is resolved. Fatigue can be unrelenting and needs, and in general, parents with inflammatory types of arthritis report much higher fatigue and much less energy than parents without arthritis. On average, about 50% more fatigue or 50% less energy. It's more than being tired. It's not a little nap or me time that, although that still might help. This persistent, overwhelming sense of fatigue really knocks people flat. Everyone adapts to it a little bit differently or carries a different load, but to really help people understand the difference between fatigue and tiredness, there's examples from some of the parents that have participated in my studies. One mom talked about how fatigue hit her while she was in an elevator, and she pushed the emergency stop button and collapsed to the floor. Just needed this quiet solitude to change her mindset and decide how she was going to get through her day. Somebody who's tired would not go to that extreme. So there are a few little bits and pieces about fatigue in the blog entry that I did related to this session that's on the CAPA website, so you can follow or look through a few more tips there. Everyone needs to understand their own context and apply their different strategies for managing symptoms and the demands of their particular family, children, the parenting tasks that are in front of them in order to reduce distress and balance what they need to do in a day. In Mariah's blog, she talks about 7 strategies, beginning with learning to fill your own cup first, which is a nice way to move into talking about how we balance, how do we make those choices and decisions about balancing what we do in a day. So on to the 5th slide. One of the areas that I've explored a bit in the studies that I've done with paid and unpaid work, it's looking at the balance of the different occupations or the different activities that form part of people's days and weeks. And occupational balance is a way of thinking about how to lead a more satisfying life, plan time, and in the context of competing and also complementary demands. It's the subjective experience of having the right amount of activities and right variation among those activities, such as paid and unpaid work, leisure, rest, and sleep. And each one of us gets to decide what right is. So it's not up to somebody else to tell us what the right amount of activities and the right variation or the right combination of activities. We decide that on our own. It's a broader way of looking at pacing, which is very specific technique that is sometimes taught in health education or arthritis self-management programs. It's maybe a little bit more philosophical, and it stems from that whole moderation in all things approach. Not to sweat the small stuff, cut yourself some slack, give yourself a break. Think of moderation in all things and not trying to be supermom, for example. In our small study of fathers with arthritis, they described this as taking ownership of their health. So they took some time to figure out what was going on with their arthritis. What did they need to do in order to be healthy? Because if they weren't healthy, how were they going to be a good father? How could they fulfill their roles as fathers? And they also spoke about redefining themselves. That they didn't say so much as, they didn't use the same language as mothers who talked about their identity and self-concept, but they did talk about redefining themselves and seeing themselves a little bit differently in order to keep being an involved father, regardless of the tasks that they could or could not do because of their arthritis. So they described how physical limitations sometimes made the tasks difficult or affected the choices they made about what activities they were going to do with their children, how they were going to play with their kids, for example. But they didn't believe, at least in this group, in this study, they didn't believe that it affected their role as a father at all. They still saw themselves as engaged, involved, and committed fathers. Next slide. So how do we start thinking about this right amount and right variety of occupations in order to balance a day or week or month? And a lot of it begins with a flexible mindset to deal with that uncertainty. One mother gives the flexibility example that she needs to have a plan for the household work component of being a parent. And so she said, the house needs to be clean enough to meet safety and hygienic standards, but it doesn't have to be neat and tidy all the time. So that's an example of a flexible mindset. So where do I draw the line? So it can't be dirty. It has to be clean, but it can be untidy, and I can let that go. It doesn't have to be neat as a pin. You might want to have a plan for not doing it all, delegating, asking for help, or deciding what things can be let go at different points in time. Have a variety of downtime options, both how you have downtime on your own and how you have downtime together as a family. You don't have to be scheduled all of the time, and there's a lot of pressure in society for us to be scheduled all of the time. And if the pandemic taught people one thing, it was different views on what routine and scheduling might actually look like, how well we could survive without external schedules and create our own way of managing our time. So have a variety of options. So have 5-minute ways to chill, relax, rejuvenate. Don't always think of leisure as a half-day event. So leisure doesn't always have to be getting everybody into the car or into transit and crossing town and going for a full-day ski adventure or a half-day hike. Leisure can come in little small bits where you play a small game just for a few minutes, or you tell stories, or adults very often think of leisure as bigger events that take an hour or two or a whole day. Very young children can entertain themselves very easily in just 5 and 10 minute pockets of time. So observe your kids and think about how to cultivate self-care occupations that support rest, creativity, or physical activity in minutes versus hours. So that becomes much easier to insert them throughout the day or throughout the week. Both fathers and mothers in our studies talked about connecting with others for support and information. Chances are you can find somebody else who's farther along a similar path, who's adapting to their arthritis and the shifting demands of parenting, and they can share their wisdom. When I was a young therapist leading a group session on managing arthritis, a young mom shared how she felt guilty asking her children to pick up after themselves because she couldn't pick up after them because of her arthritis. So she thought she was failing as a mom. Nothing that I said as a young woman with neither arthritis nor children at that point in time could help her change her mind about that being a failing on her part. But another woman in the group whose children were now young adults was very clear and spoke up and said, it has absolutely nothing to do with your arthritis. It's your job as a mother to teach them to take care of themselves, and picking up after themselves is just part of that. And that opened a whole new discussion, a partnership between these two women actually, but a whole new way of thinking for the young mom. Had become a little bit more flexible about her thinking. And even though she thought she was asking them to do things because of her arthritis, just because that was the first thought that popped into her head, didn't mean that the things that she was asking her children or teaching her children to do wouldn't be what any mom would be doing with children of that particular age. So the consultation with a mom who was farther along both her arthritis and her parenting journey can be very helpful. And so you can find lots of resources available, like on the CAPA website. If Mariah was here, she'd talk about the support provided in the Facebook group that she founded, and parents who are part of that draw on each other's expertise. So sharing, seeking support and resources from other people who share some of the same interests and issues can be very helpful. And then the last slide. Lots of parents believe that their arthritis actually plays a role in raising very thoughtful and caring children, that because their children were learning to live with a parent who had a chronic illness that had some ups and downs, they learned to accommodate those. They spontaneously became helpful. They were empathetic. So many parents see this as a potential bonus of their arthritis. We're closing here with this rather optimistic view of the family fading off into the sunset, because it's always nice to conclude with some of the happy news or happy thoughts. And I'm very happy to respond to any questions. Thanks very much for your attention.
Thank you so much. I think that was really really helpful, and I can relate to so many of the points brought up through the different people you've talked to there as a parent myself. So I don't see any questions in the chat, but I mean, people are more than welcome to continue to add questions there. I've got a few myself to kind of get things started, as well as for Ashley, if anybody has any questions as well, we can kind of bring her back up. But in terms of, you talked about pacing, and I just wondered if you could maybe explain a little bit more. I mean, I have gotten so used to pacing. I mean, I've lived with rheumatoid arthritis for like over 30 years. So it's like almost who I am involves pacing. But I don't know, maybe you just explain it to everybody else in terms of what that might look like. And it might influence like a certain day, you know, as a mom or a parent with arthritis.
Sure. So pacing involves planning your day, so that it involves listening to your body, listening to yourself, and making choices or decisions about where you're going to spend your energy. So pacing is predominantly an energy management strategy. So it means people often talk about the 4 Ps or the 5 Ps, and there's probably 7, 8, or 9 Ps, depending on what perspective you bring to it. But the Ps include priorities. You need to know what's most important to do. Planning, so you need to know what you're going to do when. Positioning, because you need to take care of your body. So often you'll have more energy at work if you're using, if you've set up your workstation to accommodate your body size. So ergonomic type strategies, for example, or if you're going to be lifting and carrying children or teaching children how to crawl up onto your lap instead of picking them up and putting them on your lap. So it's a variety of strategies so that you recognize that you do what's most important at the time of day or the day of the week where you're going to have the most energy to do what's most important, that you plan some breaks or rests or physical activity or a mental break so that you can have a little bit of recovery time. So that helps you pace and be able to manage all of the things that might be part of your day or your week. It's that's why I often mention it in conjunction with balance, is that there's always a trade-off. You can't predict exactly what the day is going to be like in advance. But you know the things that you most need to get done, and pacing is kind of a strategy to think about, okay, how am I going to expend my energy? How am I choosing where to spend my energy? What's most important for it? How can I recoup some of that energy? Often this is a place where people also talk about spoon theory. And I don't know if it's worth mentioning a little bit about that, but there's a cute little story that's now decades old, because I first heard about it. I've been an OT for more than 40 years, and I think I heard about it in my first 5 years of practice. But you envision this handful or drawerful or bucketful of spoons, and you have a finite number of them. And each time you do an activity, you pull out the number of spoons to represent the energy that takes. And when you run out of spoons, you're done for the day, is the very short version of it. But you do need to think, you have a finite amount of energy, so you do need to think about how you're going to balance it. And you get to decide what's the right activities and the right amount of them, and the right variation or assortment of activities that will work for you.
Yeah. No, I think that spoon theory is still really relevant. I didn't realize how old it was, but yeah, we have perhaps a lesser, number of spoons because we live with inflammatory arthritis, for example. And, I think it's telling. And I know something I learned with especially when my kids were babies, right? I would kind of try to, if I needed to take them out and manage the car seat and put them in the stroller, it's like I try to minimize how many times I might have to do that in a day, or spread it out so that I didn't have to do it like 5 times, that maybe it was just once or twice, right? To kind of get to one place and then return home, just to, just the lessons, I guess, I've learned.
And moms, in our studies, moms shared lots of different strategies that worked in their context. So like one mom said, get to know the middle school aged girls in your neighborhood, because they like to be a mini mom. And when you mentioned about lifting kids in and out of the car, so that your next door neighbor, 11-year-old girl, might like to lift the baby in and out of the car seat and so forth, so that you can find little bits of help in the funniest little places. That same mom used to talk about, she did daylight saving time whenever she needed an extra sleep. So she just turned all the clocks back an hour. She said it only works until the kids are a certain age. But if you turn back the clocks an hour, and she said, then we can all get an extra hour's rest. So people would squeeze in or sneak in little strategies that just save little pockets of energy here and there.
Yeah, right. And I mean, kind of wrapping things around just some of those additional supports, right? We talked about doulas and perhaps how to access them, but occupational therapists too, or do you know, maybe just a brief explanation, can they help? Where can you maybe find them? And, particularly as it relates to parenting. And then maybe, Ashley, you may want to comment on that too, in terms of doulas, generally speaking.
Yeah. So most occupational therapists should be able to help you with strategies related to parenting or managing energy and so forth, although you will be able to find some OTs who have worked with a lot of people with arthritis, or have worked with parents a lot of the time, so they might have additional, more depth of expertise. You can find OTs in the outpatient departments of hospitals. You can find them in private practice. In Canada, you can go to the Canadian Association of Occupational Therapists website, caot.ca, and go to the link that says Find an Occupational Therapist. So you can find them geographically. You can also find them by expertise. So you can type in arthritis or musculoskeletal some diseases, for example, so you can find occupational therapists near you. Your physician or rheumatologist can also refer you to an occupational therapist. So if you can see an occupational therapist as an outpatient in a publicly funded system, then you might find that there's a waiting list or a limited number of visits that you can have, but they wouldn't be out of pocket. And if you find them in the private sector, then there would be a fee, but often extended health plans, if you have them, have a few dollars available for paramedical support. And occupational therapists are often included in that group.
Right. Yeah, and maybe I'll close off with you, Ashley. I know you shared a bit in terms of accessing doulas for Indigenous peoples through their community, but I don't know if you would have some perhaps general advice around accessing that kind of support, because I can maybe see some value sort of as you're getting used to coming home and being a parent and adapting these tasks. I don't know.
Yeah, I think my best advice would be to like connect with your social worker or a nurse practitioner that's on the floor if you've just given birth, to see if that's available. If you're accessing other parenting programs, they probably know about doulas. One of the things the doulas generally do is a lot of outreach work, and so trying to get kind of their information into the hands of OTs, so that OTs can refer to doulas and doulas can refer to OTs. And so they're trying to be a little bit more collaborative in the ways that they approach things. And just like OTs, they're, the same way they're talking to OTs, they're talking to people at a food bank, or they're talking to people at, different kind of areas, so that no matter what that point is, if somebody says this is the type of support I need, that there would be like a referral type of process. So I think it's just open communication and kind of identifying what kind of supports you're looking for, and hopefully be able to kind of match up what makes most sense.
Yeah. And I can imagine there's like a personal element to it too, right? In terms of finding, like I know in terms of even accessing like a psychologist, it's sort of the same idea, like you feel you maybe mesh more with one person versus another. So it might be something to consider as well. I know I've even just kind of going back to occupational therapy, I know myself, I've accessed some supports there. I feel very lucky in the province of Ontario. We can get OTs or occupational therapists paid for free of charge through like a program through the Arthritis Society Canada. But I think we're one of the few provinces, and it usually doesn't involve a significant wait. It's some special funding, I think, that they've been offered through the Ontario Ministry of Health. So anyways, but I think for those of you in Ontario is often a resource I suggest people go to, because you don't have to pay out of pocket, and they're very familiar with arthritis related issues, and are sort of more specially trained in that. So anyways, I thought I'd put that little plug in there. And I really appreciate you both. I think it really shows just the variety of supports out there that people can access, that parenting is something that people can and should do if that's something they want to do. And it's just a matter of finding the right tools and supports and services out there to enable you to do it to the best that you can. So it is possible. I have a 17-year-old and an 11-year-old, so I've managed despite being diagnosed at quite a young age, right? I was 14 years old. So I just hopefully we'll leave that on a final note of possibility and hope for people considering that, potentially in their future. So thank you so much, Ashley. Thank you so much, Catherine. I think Preet just put an evaluation form, which I'll share afterwards. With those who've registered, even if they wish to kind of take a look at the recordings, and they are most welcome to sort of evaluate as well. And before I do finally sign off, maybe we'll just launch that final poll and see, Anna, if I can get you to launch that final poll, then we can see how people have done before and after, and hopefully we've provided a few more parenting strategies move ahead and consider that as you contemplate life as a parent while living with arthritis. So I do see a lot of people moved up to intermediate. So this is good to hear. They're feeling more confident in terms of the possibilities here. So, I mean, just doing a sort of rough assessment. So I'm really glad to hear this. And it'll be uploaded to our YouTube channels in the coming month or so that if there's something that you want to go back and refer to, you can do so on your own time and at your own pace. So again, thank you so much and have a good rest of your day. And happy early Father's Day for those with who identify as fathers in our audience. Thanks so much.